So I know I'm super late with this news, but this came right around the time that Summer Game Fest happened and Inside Out 2 stuff, and so I was really busy during that time. But I've covered Suicide Squad quite a bit on this channel, so I figured even if it's late, it's still worth discussing. We finally kind of know what happened behind the scenes with Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League, the various management missteps that led to this game fumbling and stumbling at launch, and that led to what I think will eventually be an inevitable death. Looking at Metacritic right now, you can see that across the board, the reception surrounding this game from critics and players alike is just not favorable. Beyond that, you've got the fact that on a corporate level for Warner Brothers, this was a huge L, with Suicide Squad having lost Warner Brothers over $200 million. That's just how poorly it did as a live service. It completely failed to recoup development costs. And then looking at what the player base looks like right now, not only did Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League launch to a tepid all-time peak number of just a little over 13,000 players, but also right now, we're looking at 24-hour peaks that are in the low triple digits and currently just double digits worth of players checking this game out. That is simply not sustainable for such an expensive live service. Not enough people are playing and engaging and spending money on the microtransactions, and not enough people will engage with future content. And so now we're in a situation where it's very likely that Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League will suffer the same fate as the likes of Anthem, Marvel's Avengers, and Redfall, all developed by studios that traditionally make single-player experiences and were too ambitious with their live service endeavors and went for a route that was more about chasing a trend rather than making something that will truly take the genre to the next level. So what exactly happened? Well, here is an investigative report from Jason Schreier published back in June 6, 2024 via news outlet Bloomberg. If you want the nitty-gritty details, I'd recommend you check this article out. I've got for you guys a basic summary of everything that happened. And it all began back in 2015 when, after the launch of Batman Arkham Knight, co-founders of Rocksteady Studios, Jamie Walker and Sefton Hill, wanted to work on a new IP, more specifically on a multiplayer puzzle-solving game codenamed Stones. But then they got the license to Suicide Squad, and at the end of 2016, they decided to scrap Project Stones in favor of this Suicide Squad endeavor, which I understand that compulsion. I mean, they already delved into the Batman verse with the Arkham series. So, Suicide Squad with Rocksteady's pedigree of experience as far as action games are concerned, that could have been a great combo if it hadn't been for Warner Brothers executives pitching making that game a live service, because, as you know, all game publishers like to say that live service is the future and that's where the focus should be, which is not a future that we want. We want variety of games. There is a place for live services, but if that's all we're chasing just for the sake of monetization and for the sake of corporate goals, then that loses the soul of creativity. But Rocksteady was convinced by Warner Brothers executives, and so Rocksteady leadership decided ultimately that Suicide Squad would be a live service, which already had staff concerned. And to make this endeavor work, they had to increase their workforce by quite a bit, from roughly 160 employees to more than 250. And that kind of increase was kind of too much for Rocksteady to handle. They were just not used to managing that many people. And at the same time, that's still a much smaller team compared to, say, Destiny's team, which is significantly larger, which emphasizes just how unprepared Rocksteady was to tackle a live service of this scale and magnitude and ambition. Matters weren't helped by the fact that leadership just had no clear direction, which seems to be a common occurrence for these failing live services. Anthem, for example, a big part of why that failed was because of a failure to have a very clear idea of what this game was going to be. ideas kept changing, stuff kept getting scrapped. The same thing happened with Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League. And weird decisions were made, like shifting the focus away from melee combat and focusing more on guns. And that left the staff confused because characters like Captain Boomerang, you would think he would use his, boomerang as his primary offensive weapon. So them suddenly shifting to everyone using guns, that homogenized all the characters and made them all feel kind of samey, save for a few elements like the way they move and some ultimates. But overall, it's just you're shooting, and that's kind of the main form of combat, and it robbed the characters of their uniqueness, which shouldn't be the case for something like Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League, which is comprised of a ragtag band and team of members who are very unique from each other. And then there's the fact that compared to their previous games, compared to the Arkham games, Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League's open world was just significantly larger, on top of the fact that they were going to have multiple playable heroes, and all of that apparently made programming for the game a nightmare for the engineers, just made things so much more complex. And so engineers were forced to create short-term solutions and fixes that would screw them over in the long run, because they thought that there was just this set deadline and they had to take these shortcuts to meet those deadlines. And so eventually, once they realized there's no way we can ship this game in time, all those short-term solutions that would cause long-term problems were there. And so that led to delays that forced them to have to go back and kind of re-engineer and reprogram things. And they had to fix a lot of spaghetti code, if you will. Progress was further stalled by Sefton Hill, one of the co-founders of Rocksteady and director on Suicide Squad, because it would just simply take him too long to review developers' work and provide feedback. It would take anywhere from weeks to months. That's paired with the fact that he consistently struggled to maintain and relay a consistent vision, and the constant scrapping of things that developers would work months on didn't help matters. So, for example, apparently originally they were going to have this extensive vehicle system, but then the developers were like, well, all these characters can move pretty well in the open world, so why do we need a vehicle system at all? That vehicle system was worked on for months, and then, developers realized it was just it was very redundant, and so that whole system was eventually scrapped. And so that vehicle system and the fact that developers had spent months on it only for it to not be used in the end ended up wasting months of development time. Sources also relate to Bloomberg and Jason Schreier that Sefton Hill wasn't playing the games that he was taking inspiration from. So he wasn't playing games like Destiny to learn why these kinds of more successful live services and looter shooters work. What about these games make them successful? So Sefton Hill was directing a looter shooter live service pretty much blindly, which certainly doesn't help when this whole studio, Rocksteady, has never made a live service game. And so they do need to take a look at the competition and take some inspiration, while of course adding their own spin to it. But to not try to learn from existing live services at all, when there's a studio that is only experienced in making single-player experiences, that only added to the development troubles and struggles behind the scenes. Apparently, during development, there was a constant struggle to find ways to make the activities in Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League feel both repeatable and fun, rather than repetitive and tedious. And so a lot of employees had a lot of concerns surrounding the direction of the game, or the lack thereof, the workflow, and certain decisions behind it. But management and leadership wouldn't listen, and they promised that just things would work out because they were Rocksteady and that made games like Arkham that ended up working out in the end. This all reminds me a lot of the whole BioWare magic mentality that was reported on in regards to what happened to Anthem and Mass Effect Andromeda, where the development was a mess, but there was this toxic positivity where leadership would go, don't worry about it, we are awesome, and we are the studio, we are the BioWare, or in this case, we are the Rocksteady. And so no matter what the criticisms may be surrounding how this game is being developed, things are going to work out in the end. So instead of trying to fix the issue, they just kind of decided to ignore the problems and engage in this culture where criticism and constructive feedback and fixing things based on that feedback was discouraged. And it was just more about pushing through this lackluster environment, just ignoring the problems for the sake of positivity and pretending like they're too good to fail. Except the final results obviously highlight the fact that no studio is immune to failure. If a project is mismanaged enough, no amount of Bioware magic or toxic positivity or grandstanding because you are the studio that made prolific games such as this and that, no amount of that is going to help if the process is utterly fucked and if leadership is just not managing things well, doesn't offer proper direction, and is just completely butchering the pipeline of the development process. And then what further didn't help is the fact that when Warner Brothers executives would review progress reports and demos of the in-progress builds of the game, they would provide overwhelmingly positive feedback. And of course they would, because they weren't looking at the game from the perspective of a gamer. They were looking at it from the perspective of businessmen. They were looking at it from the perspective of, oh my God, this could make us a lot of money because it's a live service and it looks pretty enough. But they didn't really understand the nitty-gritty nuances of what makes a good live service good. It was just this echo chamber of executives looking at the game that they wanted, the gold mine that they hoped this game would achieve, rather than looking at the game from an objective perspective and looking at it from the perspective of, is this actually fun to play? Would people jive with this? Would they stick with this for the long term? Warner Brothers executives were so confident in what they were seeing, in fact, that they apparently told Rocksteady that they believed very strongly that Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League could become a billion-dollar franchise, that this game could take this franchise to that level of financial success. Fast forward to present day, and the game cost them $200 million as of their last financial meeting and investors call. Eventually, around fall of 2022, out of the blue, co-founders Jamie Walker and Sefton Hill would leave Rocksteady to start a new studio called 100 Star Games. They expressed the intent of having a development studio that is free from corporate mandates and pressures. So clearly, there was something about the way Warner Brothers was operating and the way they were handling their leadership of Rocksteady and Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League that the co-founders were not happy about. Though based on the reporting here, it does feel like Sefton Hill in particular did contribute to some of the woes surrounding Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League's development. But yeah, eventually the game would come out on February of 2024 after numerous delays and after a lot of skepticism from fans who saw the marketing material and realize that this just looks like another generic, repetitive, insufferable, boring, substanceless live service looter shooter. And that's precisely what it ultimately ended up being, which is why it was panned critically. And people were hoping that the Joker DLC and Season 1 would provide some hope for the future. But that was a disaster, completely lacking in substantial new content, not to mention the way they locked Joker behind a huge grind wall that you could skip if you paid. That was really scummy and went against the promise of characters not being paywalled. And so one thing led to another. Players dropped off very quickly. The game again cost Warner Brothers $200 million and potentially more since then. And the rest is history. And I don't imagine it'll be long before the news is relayed that Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League will end operations in the not-so-distant future, and that the game will stop being supported. It'll likely still be online for a while for people to play, kind of like how Anthem is still technically online. But in terms of support for the game and future content and major additions and it being a viable long-term live service, those hopes have long been shattered. And I suppose all we can hope is that Rocksteady will go back to their roots with their next game if the studio doesn't get butchered by Warner Brothers because of financial failures that were in part a result of Warner Brothers leadership kind of pressuring them into making a live service. If Rocksteady continues, the hope is that they will embrace what made them good and what they specialize in, and hopefully they can come back. But one has to wonder if this is the same Rocksteady as the one we knew during the Arkham days even. The co-founders are gone, and how much of the staff from the golden age of Rocksteady are still at the studio. It's kind of the same questions that we ask about BioWare, but I suppose only time will tell what fate holds for Rocksteady. In the meantime, though, this is everything you need to know about the current state of Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League and what's being reported on in terms of what happened during the game's development that might have contributed to the game's current failures. Let me know in the comments below what your thoughts and opinions are on all of this, and to be further updated on all things gaming news, reviews, and discussions, stay tuned right here on Young Yeah. I'll see you guys next time. Young out.